that out. And so we're in the third week of this Lent series of the Great Invitation, and we've looked at the invitations from Jesus throughout Scripture. The first two, to come and see, come and drink, and today we're going to look at come away with me. And so we're taking these invitations and we're identifying how they relate to your journey of faith and how you, like the disciples and the early followers of Jesus, have an opportunity to accept these invitations and go deeper in your faith and in your relationship with Jesus. And so the first week we saw how Jesus says, come and see, and come to the reality that Jesus is who he says he is, and that he'll meet you where you are. And we also talked about how important it is to extend the invitation to others and think beyond your own invitation to follow Jesus and to bring someone along with you. And then last week we took a look at how Jesus said, if anyone thirst, come and drink, and how life with Jesus produces a river of living water through his Spirit. And it's the life-giving power of Jesus in your life. And this morning we're going to look at these verses in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus is inviting his disciples to come away with him to a quiet place to rest. That seems like a neat and tidy summary of these verses here in Mark 6, but that is not the case at all. There is something greater that happens here, and there are lessons that we can take from this particular invitation that we can apply to our own journey with Jesus. And so we're looking at Mark 6, and we're beginning with verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. And then because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so the disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. So Jesus is suggesting that this is a good time to rest. And I'm pretty sure the disciples would think like you and I, this means we're going to go to a secluded place and we're going to kick back and we're going to do almost nothing. That's vacation, to get away from the normal day-to-day, from the schedules and the checklists and the responsibilities. Settle your brain, let your body unwind. When I put myself in the disciples' place, that is what I would be thinking. But then when they arrived to their secluded destination, there was another crowd there to greet them. And Jesus stepped off the boat and went right back to work. Through the compassionate eyes of Jesus, he saw people in need of direction, and he saw an opportunity to meet their needs right there in the very place where even he thought they were going to get some rest. What happens next is really no surprise. The disciples look at this as a big roadblock to their opportunity for a much-needed break. So when they suggest to Jesus that the people just be dismissed to go and find themselves something to eat, Jesus sees their self-centeredness and decides it's a much better idea if they provide their evening meal. The rest of the story is one that you've probably heard before, because this is where Jesus works a miracle by feeding thousands of people with very little food. To the disciples, it's a nightmare. We don't have enough food. How are we going to afford to get all this food? Are we going to use our money? And Jesus, when are we going to get that break that you promised us? And so let's review how this story ends. But he answered, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "That would be more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do we have?" he asked. "Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. And then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. So what started as a quiet, intimate gathering away with Jesus and his disciples turned into a dinner party for 5,000. What was initially an invitation to come away with Jesus turned into an evening of passing baskets of bread and fish and then cleaning up after everybody. Now, you can read throughout the Gospels the calling of the first disciples, where Jesus said, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." It was an invitation to follow Jesus and to join him as he sought to spread the gospel and teach others about the ultimate plan of salvation for all of humanity. It was an invitation to choose to follow Jesus and leave the things of this world behind. To the rich young ruler, he challenged to sell all that he had and contribute to the plight of the poor. To the man who wanted to go home first and bury his dead, he said, "Let the dead bury themselves." And to those who would come after him, Jesus said, "Let them take up their own cross and follow me." An invitation to follow Jesus, to come away with him, is an invitation to experience life with and like Jesus. But when you choose to accept his invitation to go with him, you accept the reality that things will not necessarily go the way you would or could imagine. There are a few lessons that we can learn from this moment when Jesus invited the disciples to follow him into a time and a place of rest. But first, let's take a look at the definition of rest, how we understand rest. And I think you add your own idea and definition to the word rest based on your own lives and maybe the absence of rest. You see rest and relaxation going hand in hand. Rest means getting off your feet and giving your body and mind time to rejuvenate just to go back to work again. And I'm certain that in the relationship between Jesus and the disciples, at this point, they were looking forward to that. They were looking forward to an opportunity to rest, knowing that they would probably be going on to another adventure in ministry with Jesus. Now, as a musician, there's another definition of rest I could tell you about. In music, when you get a rest, that's a period of musical silence, where as a musician, you could be sitting for a long period of time without playing your instrument. Some instrumentalists have such long periods of rest in a piece of music that you see them actually put their instrument down until it's time for them to play again. And then there's rest when you place something on something else to give it support. So, you rest your chin in your hand, or you lean up against something where you rest a part of your body on it in order to give the rest of your body a little bit of a break. And I think there's something in this particular definition of the word that I like in context to where Jesus is with his disciples right now. Vocabulary.com defines this particular kind of rest as to relax into something and let it support you. This isn't so much like, let's take a rest, as much as it is, surrender yourselves to the possibilities of what this time with Jesus might look like. Surrender yourselves to the guidance and care of the Savior of the world, who will make certain that you will get the rest that you need when you need it. But he will continually challenge you to go further and deeper in your faith. Relax into life's journey with Jesus and let him support you. So all of this setup and all this talk about rest, only to say that this passage really isn't about rest at all. But the idea that what happens when you accept Christ's invitation to follow him, or in the words of Mark, come away with him, you'll see that something very unique is going to happen. And when we look at these three lessons, we're going to see that. The first lesson that we see when we choose to follow Jesus is that we'll be encouraged to see things differently. I just spent a few moments talking to you all about how we picture rest. And I know for me, Sunday afternoons, I almost always find myself on the sofa with my eyes closed. But sometimes there's things that need to be done before Monday, or things wind up on the calendar in the middle of a Sunday afternoon that we hadn't planned on. And suddenly, my idea of Sunday afternoon has completely changed. When the disciples followed Jesus to the secluded place for rest, what they expected was very different from what transpired. But the end result was their being eyewitnesses to yet another miracle and another lesson on what ministry really looks like. If you're going to follow me and be my disciple, you need to always be ready to fulfill the needs of others. You need to see people and situations with different eyes. Jesus saw these people who met them there as lost people without a leader who were aimlessly following them from one location to another. And so Jesus saw the opportunity to demonstrate how sometimes you look at your resources as limited or not enough to make a difference, when you really need to trust him to take what you do have and let it be a blessing to others. The disciples saw only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, but you also have me. Watch how far that can go. Come away with me and see what can be done with very little. Come away with me and see how Christ challenges you to see beyond your limitations. Come away with me and see people and the world differently. The second lesson that we can take from this invitation is that following Jesus will always put you in the company of others. The disciples arrive at this wonderful place, plan to bring them a much-needed break. And the passage even starts by saying Jesus recommended this break because of all of the coming and going of people. But as they step off the boat, they're instantly surrounded by a crowd. Listen, we all need time alone. Everybody needs alone time. And everybody needs time alone with themselves and with God. But we also need community. Have you heard that enough? Have we mentioned that enough in the last couple of weeks? Are you getting tired of hearing us talk about community? The reality is, it's how you were created. And it's how God intended for life to be with you. And being in community ultimately moves you forward in your faith. Jenny Allen, in her book, Get Out of Your Head, says, community is an essential. We find ourselves in a generation that has made an idol out of the very thing God is calling us away from, independence. And she goes on to explain that the distractions of life in general keep us from going to God for help. And it's shame, inward shame for things in our lives or things that we bring or things that we struggle with that keeps us from seeking help from others. And Jesus takes advantage of a teachable moment to show the disciples what it means to take a curveball in your own plans to serve others and to change lives. But it takes a crowd of other people. He goes outside the inner circle of the disciples. He takes their small group, as we would call them, and makes a connection with others. And the disciples' lives and ministry are changed because of this moment with the crowd. Following Jesus always includes community. And the third lesson we learn from this invitation is that following Jesus rejuvenates the journey. When you choose to follow Jesus, you will experience moments in life that will consistently rejuvenate you and give you the strength to continue on and go further and deeper. What took place in that secluded place where Jesus took the disciples was life-changing for all involved. The disciples needed constant reminders of what Jesus was inviting them into. Jesus knew they needed consistent refocusing on what their ministry was all about and how God was going to equip them and see them through the challenges that lie ahead. And that's true of your journey. When you answer the call to come away and follow him. We could go on and on about the disciples' experiences with Jesus. This very moment is just the beginning of a long night where ultimately the disciples will find themselves in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, petrified at the sight of Jesus walking on the water, only to learn that because they chose Jesus and they committed to following him, they will find peace in the midst of their turmoil. And because of how Jesus once again demonstrated who he intended to be in his relationship with them, those first disciples continued to follow him on their journey. They couldn't see or understand how it was all going to end, but they were encouraged every step of the way to continue following Jesus. It's not only the words of Jesus and the promises that he makes, but it's also how he demonstrates his presence and his never-ending pursuit of seeing you through the journey. Seeing you through the journey that he has invited you to come and be part of. And so those three lessons again are: following Jesus encourages you to see things differently. It always puts you in the company of others, and it always rejuvenates your soul for the journey. Remember that definition of rest that I mentioned earlier: to relax into something and let it support you. It turns out that Jesus, the rest that Jesus promised the disciples was an opportunity for them to relax into something or someone, Jesus, and let him support them. Jesus didn't just send them off to fend for themselves and discover this tumultuous crowd that they would have to feed and entertain on their own. Jesus went with them and gave them what they needed to see what they could do with him by their side. It would help them not only in this moment, but in the moments to come, when he would not be physically by their side, but he would empower them with the Spirit to continue to do what he demonstrated to them. Surrendering to him and to his leading takes you on a journey where you will see things differently, where you will always be part of a community, and where you will always be encouraged to go further and deeper. Now, I don't think we can talk about this invitation without seeing it as a checkpoint in your journey. Maybe you've already accepted this invitation and you've been following him and you've been on this journey for some time. Maybe you've seen his work in your life, but some of what we've talked about seems foreign, or it's been absent from your journey more recently. Well, like the disciples, he wants to remind you that it's not about you, but it's about what he wants for you. What turned the disciples' time away with Jesus from a break into a banquet was the reality that in the midst of their journey, an opportunity to do something that ultimately brings God glory was a bigger deal than a nap. When Jesus says, "Come away with me," it's about what he wants to do in and through you. It's about how he can use you for his kingdom, and it's about what he does with what you have and who you are that can only be done by accepting his invitation and making him part of your life journey.